This is Nuance, and we'll be speaking of New York's good cause eviction law. Of course, I'm Mike Scala, joined as always by Jay Carter, also known as Timmy, the hip hop artist in the chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on, Jay?
Freezing this morning. That's what's going on. Woke
Freezing.
up to some snow. It's like 30, 31 degrees outside. I'm gonna have to adjust my heater to make sure to make sure I match this drop. And
Okay.
it's yeah.
It isn't excessively cold in New York. It was cold for a bit, but today it felt all right. Of course, I prefer the warmer weather, so I don't, I'm done with winter already, right? Regardless of whether it's 20 degrees or 30 degrees. I just want the spring in the summer.
Facts, facts. It looks like it's same temperature there. Actually, you know what? It looks like it's moved up here to 38
Okay.
already. And you guys are at 32. So
Well, yeah, it is 7:30 at night and the sun is down now.
yeah, 32 is disgusting. It's offensive.
It's freezing, literally, right?
Yeah.
By the way, have you gotten used to the Celsius system being in Japan, or is it still Fahrenheit
Not
there?
at all. Not at all. It still really means nothing to me. It doesn't mean anything. Like I can't associate the numbers with anything. I know like I don't know, like 30 degrees is really hot, but I can't like wrap my head around. I can't quantify it
Right,
properly.
right. But I mean, at least you know 0 degrees is freezing, right? 100 degrees is boiling water, right? So I guess 32 Fahrenheit would be 0 Celsius. And then what is the boiling? Like 100 degrees Celsius would be what, like the 212 or whatever it is Fahrenheit?
I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know. All I know is 45 degrees Celsius makes me feel like I was sitting in soup.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I went to a hot spring and this is one of the older ones, and the water temperature was 45 degrees Celsius, which is ridiculous. And I like a hot bath, but not like that. I got in it, and just it was so hot that it just you couldn't move, because if you moved you would feel the heat more because it's starting to touch all over the rest of you. So I just kind of sat there frozen, and it was about a minute, and I was like, this is stupid. I'm not sitting in here. I'm getting out. And I
Yeah.
just left. It was like, this is ridiculous. There's no reason for it to be this hot.
Yeah. I was last in the ocean in Miami, and that was right after New Year's. It was a little cool to get in the water initially, but then you get used to it right away, and then it's very comfortable. And I actually fell asleep floating in the ocean right off the shore. So that's nice. You feel that weight.
What do you mean you fell asleep floating in the ocean? On what? What were you just like
No, I was just floating on the water.
were you like on some kind of like inflatable or something?
No,
How'd you fall asleep and float? Like what?
I just relaxed. You just float and you close your eyes. What do you mean?
And how'd you fall asleep though? Like what are you, Aquaman? Like
I wasn't underwater. I was floating on top of the water.
yeah, but you can't just float and fall asleep. You won't just stay afloat.
Yes, you will. I do. Why wouldn't you?
That's because you would
That's,
sink.
you
Your
don't sink.
body would collapse.
You only sink when your muscles start tensing up. If you're relaxed, you float. If the water is salty enough,
That's crazy.
yeah. So you just relax. You do the dead man's float, right? You spread your arms out,
Yeah.
relax. I have a video of it. Not my whole body, but you can see my face in the video. I just posted it to TikTok, I think. That's me actually floating with my eyes closed. And yeah, a couple of times I caught myself snoring. So yeah, I like that feeling of weightlessness that you get in the water, right? It's a way to
Right.
relieve tension in a sense, right? Because anywhere you are on land, you're pressing down on the ground, it's pressing back up on you, right? In the water, you have that ease of tension.
Right. There's what is that? What is that? There's a lake. Is it in the Middle East where the water is like so salty, like you don't have to do anything to just
The
to
Dead,
float because
the Dead Sea.
is that it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the one where they said Jesus probably walked on water because it's so salty. It's kind of easier.
Or something like that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah,
So
you could do it. You don't need to, like I said, you could do it in really any salty water, any ocean. I find I can float. Even in pools, by the way. I probably wouldn't be able to fall asleep though in that, but that I can you can relax and just kind of keep yourself afloat.
My legs fall down when I do that. If I don't, yeah, if I don't keep it steady, my legs fall down.
That's the biggest problem in a pool. Eventually, yeah, your legs will get tired and fall down. But
Yeah.
yeah, with that salt
Um,
content, you don't necessarily need that. So anyway, speaking of salt, I told you there's so much salt on the streets here. It's kind of embarrassing. My man Andre came by before with his dog with Franny, had little booties, boots on her feet because he was like, man, she can't be walking in this because it had snowed here a while back. But there's just so much salt left behind. It seems like all the cars now are covered in salt. It's just everywhere. The sidewalks. It's just a salty world over here. It's crazy.
well, if this that to be a problem, the cars are covered in salt because they eat through the paint,
Sure, sure. It's
eat through the
everything.
paint and the metal if it sits there long enough.
All right. So I just texted someone. Hold on. About the good cause eviction law.
Right. Yes. That and
We're looking
it
at it here in New York, and New York isn't the only place that is doing it, right? This is modeled after similar laws that are going on around the country.
right. And I would imagine laws like these come into place because there's need for tenant protections because there's, you know, a lot of abuses by landlords, even though it's their property, but a lot of times they can be abusive in terms of trying to get extra profit out of it or wanting to just do whatever they will with it. So I can imagine there needs to be more protections there.
sure. And then you have factors like COVID, right? A housing
Right,
shortage, a homelessness problem, right? All these things
right,
together.
right.
But I don't know.
Yeah,
There's a tension here, right? And by design, right? You often hear about these laws and they really create a tension or exploit a tension, I guess, between simple property law rights, right? Like human decency, things like that, issues that you've articulated, and contract negotiate
right.
the freedom to contract whatever contract you want to enter into, right? I mean, that's also part of our legal system. So sometimes it gets tricky when you have these laws that represent a restriction on your right to contract in a sense.
Yeah. I think there definitely needs to be some sort of um something in the middle there. Because like you said, there's all these different circumstances, right? There was COVID, there's the housing shortage,
Mhm.
and then we've got what's happening now is we've got certain companies or corporations buying up all the available housing, making the shortage even worse so that they could
Sure.
either rent it out and increase the rents ridiculously, or they can turn it into short-term rental properties like
Right.
Airbnb.
That is true, right? Airbnb also. Now, I was looking at some of the stuff. I don't practice landlord tenant law, so I'm not extremely well versed in this area. But I did see
Mm,
that there was some attempt to make a difference between small landlords and big landlords here in terms of some of the restrictions that were being applied. I think they
okay, okay.
stopped it at if you had 10 rental units. I think that might have been the marker. So
Right,
they're looking at that stuff. But the big thing that strikes me about it, and this is law now in New York, it was passed last spring, is you can't evict someone anymore just because their lease is up, right?
right.
And that's really the tension, I think, between property rights and the right to contract. I mean, just on a very basic, superficial level, you would think two people would have the right to enter into any kind of agreement that they wanted, right? Who is the government to tell these two private parties they can't enter into such a contractual relationship if they so choose?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but I guess you got to have protections in place for in case there's exploitation in that regard.
Right, right. But is there though? I mean, yes, I agree with that as a premise. But taking the instance of your lease is up, is there exploitation built into that, or is there a danger of exploitation when someone's lease is up for the landlord to be like, hey, listen, we both satisfy the terms of the lease, right? Let's say the security deposit was returned, no issues. It's just the lease was up. Now we, for
Right,
whatever reason, want to reclaim that property, that apartment or
right.
house, whatever it is. Should it not be the landlord's prerogative to do that? And again, isn't it up to what the parties agree to? Because in this sense, the law is really overriding, in a way, what the people agreed to in the first place.
Right. I think they should. However, I can see situations where that could be abused, right? And again, it doesn't sound like it it sounds like it should be cut and dry, right? We agreed to the lease is up, there's no problems. Our agreement is finished. If we want to enter into a new agreement, these are my new terms for the new
Yeah.
agreement. It should be that sound like it'd be that simple.
Right. I guess
When
an area where it could be exploited is if the landlord is planning on kicking everyone out after their lease term for the sake of always increasing the rent. But
right,
put those protections in the law, that could be separate from whether someone can be evicted after their lease is up, right? And can't you just have a rent protection? Because that's part of this as well, that rent
right,
increases have to be reasonable. And that makes sense,
right.
right?
So maybe explain what the good cause eviction law is, first off.
So that's the basic gist of it, that if a landlord is going to evict a tenant now, they could only do so with so-called good cause. And there's a list of good causes. I mean, the ones that you would expect, right? Like if you damage the property, if you're a nuisance, if you're using the apartment or the property to do something illegal, things that you would expect
Right,
someone would be properly evicted for. If you don't pay rent is on there, but with an asterisk. And that's only if the rent increase was not unreasonable. And that kind of makes sense, because if you're going to say that the person is entitled to stay even after the lease term is up, then you kind of have to also include a provision that any rent increase can't be unreasonable, because otherwise the
right.
landlord can be like, all right, I can't kick you out simply because the lease term is up, and I'm going to increase the rent by $1 million to make it unaffordable. You know what I mean? So if you're
And
doing,
I think
you have to actually have that protection in there as well. But I don't know. It's kind of strange. I mean, could you get around this by saying the landlord is entitled to kick you out after the lease is up? However, even when the landlord brings in someone else, they can't increase it by too much, whether it's you or different tenant, because that would also keep the landlord from just jacking the prices up too high, in theory.
yeah, it's a difficult one. I think some of that probably comes from what we saw after COVID when a lot of rents just skyrocketed, like ridiculously. Um, and so, which was really unfair. You can understand from, the landlord side, they probably lost money during COVID. Many of them
Sure.
did as well. Um, oh, looks like we have someone coming in here.
We do have a special guest joining. What's going on, Ozzy? We got Ozzy Edwards, a community advocate from the Rockaways. Good to see you, Ozzy.
What's good? How you doing?
We're doing
How
well.
you doing?
We're doing well. We're just talking about the good cause eviction law that is now in effect in New York. And in particular, how landlords cannot force you to leave after your lease term is up anymore, right? And we're wondering if that's a necessary provision of the law. We want to protect tenants. We want to make sure that rent increases are not unreasonable, and that's part of it as well. But do you need to have a provision that says that someone is entitled to stay even if the lease is up? Any thoughts on that, on the good cause stuff?
Hold on one second. I gotta close the door. Uh, I'm sorry.
He's like, all I said was hello. You hit me with all of this stuff.
It got
That
deep.
put me on the spot.
So
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
Well, just your thoughts on the good cause eviction law. So we're talking about now how landlords cannot evict tenants without good cause, right?
Right.
One of the provisions of that law is that a tenant is entitled to stay even if their lease is up. The landlord cannot kick you out just because your lease is up. If they can increase the rent, it can't be unreasonable, which makes sense. But we're really zeroing in on this part about your lease is up, you're entitled to stay. Do we think that's necessary, or is that too burdensome on people's freedom to contract and just agree to whatever they want to agree to?
I think it's a burden.
It seems like it.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely think it's a burden as far as with the and you're talking about with the landlord.
Right. Right. Of course, we want
I
to
mean,
protect the tenants as well.
you want to protect the tenants,
Yeah.
but also at the same time, I mean, of course, the courts, and I mean, you know this better than anybody. I mean, the courts is, I mean, in the court, they're going to give the tenant some time to, you know, it's got to go through series of back and forth to court.
Yeah.
But they're going to give the tenant some time to correct the situation.
Mhm.
But the problem is, it is a burden on the landlord
Right. And
because
also,
they,
what about
yeah,
two parties right to just enter into a contract, right? Like if we just say, all right, I'm gonna stay here for 6 months, we both agree to that. Basically, the law now gives you the authority to say, well, even though we have this contract, it doesn't mean anything. I'm still gonna stay regardless. You know what I mean? That should the law be superseding people's private agreements that way?
um, only if it's going to benefit in that case, it would have to benefit the landlord, though.
What do you mean?
No, I'm saying if, well, what I'm saying is that if, okay, so you have two people, if you have the landlord and, well, okay, when you go to court, of course, the court is always going to want, the judge is always going to want the tenant and the landlord to try to work it out and work out an agreement,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Correct?
correct.
So, um, but here go the problem is now if the agreement was met and both parties agreed, like they settled, like basically they worked it out themselves. Because when you go to court, they want you to work it out.
Yeah, yeah,
They want you to start. So if both parties have agreed and said, okay, you have 6 months, you know, to get your, even if they extended a year. The problem is that when the tenant goes past that, the court should step in because now the agreement to me was broken
hmm,
if the tenant stays even longer.
right, right. And there's still a process. We know that the process is onerous, and landlords often complain that it takes too long, too many rights are given to the tenants. You hear that. At the same time, you have to understand why there are protections in place for tenants, right? We do have a housing crisis, a homelessness issue. We have unfortunately, some abusive and exploitative landlords. So there are considerations to make, but I'm just wondering where that line should be drawn.
What
Was there
was what was
any?
what did you? Oh, go ahead.
Oh
I'm
no, go
sorry.
ahead. No, no, go ahead, go ahead.
What was your thought on that scenario?
To me, it strikes me as a little too burdensome on people's abilities to enter into whatever contract they want to with each other. Now, of course, you don't want those contracts to be abusive, right? Or too one-sided. So you do want to have certain protections there. But I'm just wondering if that part of it is necessary. I think there are a lot of good parts of the law. Like, for example, I think you don't want to have unreasonable rent increases and you want to protect against that. But do
Right.
you have to have it in the law that basically a lease term doesn't have to be honored anymore? You could just stay indefinitely. I mean, let's say, for example, when I was in Albany working in the Senate, I
Yeah.
contracted for a 6 month lease term, right? Because the session was from January till June. And so I was going to be in there from January till June. That was understood. In July, they were able to then prepare to bring someone else in, right? For the rest of the year or whatever. But now under this law, I could just lease a place for 6 months or a year or whatever, and then just say, well, you might have been making plans to have someone else come in, but I'm going to disregard that agreement and stay indefinitely because the law allows me to. I'm just, I don't know if that's the correct way to handle that.
What was is there any information on what the rationale behind putting that into the law was?
Between that particular provision,
Do we know?
I didn't see anything in particular on that. I can only imagine it's just part of protecting tenants' rights and trying to combat this idea that that landlords are just going to kick you out after the year is up to try to re-rent it to someone else for a much higher price. But again, that goes back to my point about why can't you just make it so that even if they're going to rent it to someone else, they can't charge that new person a lot more than they charge the last person. You know what I mean?
Right. Like
Now here we go. Here is the scenario. Now, this is what I'm curious about. Now,
Yeah.
are you talking about as far as tenants that live in a building, or you talking about private homes?
Both, but I believe it applies primarily to small landlords.
because with small landlords, and again, you probably will have
Yeah.
you could probably explain it to me better. Not gonna explain it to you, but there is, I believe there is a loophole for
Okay.
landlords, and I'm trying to think of the name. Basically, let's put it this way: if I own a home that's private, that's my private property, and I went to the tenant, and I didn't go to court to say, well, they owe me money and they're not paying money, but I went to court to switch it to say, I want my apartment back because I want my mother to live there.
Mm.
They would have to move. I could agree for 6 months, but after that, the court would give me my apartment back.
But is that still the case under the new good cause eviction law? I don't know.
And
But
well, that's something I have to think because I forgot the name of that. What is that called? I forgot the name. That's why I'm trying to think of the name of what's that's called. But a landlord can say, I want the apartment for my family.
well,
But you
right.
can't, you go to court and
Yeah.
you go to court and you file to get the person evicted because they're not paying you money. The court is going to,
Right. Try to drag it out, give them more time.
yeah,
Like, right.
yeah, they would
Right.
drag.
Mm.
I have
Okay.
to look
I
at
mean,
the
it
name.
almost sounds like in that scenario, you're basically saying I'm taking that apartment or that piece of the property off the rental market, right? I'm reclaiming it back for myself,
Right.
Right, because
which you
I
think
can
also
say
wouldn't be
I'm
allowed.
just trying to find a legal term in court. I'm trying to think of it, but
It's
I
not
have
like
to look it
an
up. But
emergency application, or you're thinking of something more specific.
no, it's a name to, and you normally I I mean sometimes I would tell, and again I'm not a lawyer, so
Right.
disclaimer. I mean you're a lawyer, but I know that just from research, and I forgot the name because it's been a while. But I used to tell certain landlord, like you could claim the apartment and go to court. Oh my God, what is the name of? But anyway, you could claim the apartment by saying, and I want the apartment back because of a family member. Even if you say I want it because I want it for my dog or cat, it's a
Jay,
name that you have to
search on-
file it under.
maybe you can find that, Jay, if you do a search on that.
You have to file
Take a
it's
look.
and that's good, I'm not trying to put I mean listen, when we deal with being fair, we have to look at the landlord, we also have to look at the tenants. And we know
That's
we
right.
have a
Right.
shortage and we have issues with, work with, people, with jobs and stuff. It's not easy to find a job or the price of when you're renting is very high. The rent is high, right?
Yeah.
So we understand that. But it also becomes a burden too on the landlord because they have to continue to pay their mortgage, the bill, the water bill, the bills, right?
And that became a
But
big
it's
issue.
a so there is a
Sorry.
loophole. There is a loophole. I just have to look up that name, and I'm gonna look up that name. I
Yeah.
can't.
Would you be thinking of owner occupancy eviction?
Owner occupancy. I believe yes. I think that's it. Owner occupancy.
Okay. And now the question also is, to what extent is that still allowed under the new good cause eviction law? Can you still use it the same way?
Right. Um, According to this search, it says that because of that law, that the process has been significantly changed. The landlord still would need to prove they have a good cause for eviction. Um, Potentially reclaiming the property for family use could be considered a good cause, but they probably need to prove this in court.
Right. And that's the other part of the law. So all these things we laid out, even when there are formulas, for example, to calculate what a reasonable rent increase is, and it goes by inflation and all this kind of thing, all of that is rebuttable in court, right? So it creates a presumption, but then you can fight it out in court. So a lot of this can be determined on a case by case basis too. There's some flexibility there.
Right. Right. We have comments in comments here.
Bring it on.
Um, if your lease is up, you move out. Yes, new lease can be written. Does your law require that a notice of non-renewal be issued?
Yeah, that's in there as well. There's a whole process for that, but they still can't simply kick you out just for not signing.
Right.
So, right. I believe you would just go to a month to month at that point.
Right. So
But
from what I looked up and was able to see, it came that you would automatically move to a month to month term, and without this good cause, that you could stay there indefinitely, especially under this law. As
right.
long as you continue to pay your rents and you didn't cause, you didn't fall into one of those evictable categories, you would be able to stay in there. So
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. And at first blush, it's that part of it seems to go too far, right? I agree that there should be good causes,
right,
the abuses, and all that kind of stuff, prevent the unreasonable increases, all that stuff. Yes, these protections
right.
are necessary. I just wonder if there's not a better way to handle that particular situation, the very particular situation where your lease is up, but you're just going to say, well, even though we had this agreement, I'm going to break it and I'm just going to stay here. That's what you're doing. You're saying I'm not going to honor the agreement, the contract that we signed.
Right.
Well, kind of. I mean, the contract's over with. You're just not you're just not entering into an at-will new contract. You already fulfilled the
Right,
terms
but
of the contract.
sure,
So
but
that's over.
you
It's
don't have
just like
right. But under that contract, you don't have a right to stay there. You're just saying I'm going to stay here
it's like we're
regardless.
in a new space now. The contract's over, and so I'm just not going to come to the table for the next part of this if there's
Yeah.
another part. But
But
we already
but
we
while
already
you're
did.
doing that, you're still entitled to the property. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, you're right. I see what you mean though, because it's not like you necessarily violated the contract. It's just
Right.
you're kind of, I guess, disrespecting the agreement that you would think. I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm thinking in terms of my situation, for example, like when I knew I was only going to be there for 6 months, and I knew that
Right.
probably looking for another tenant to come in after my 6 months was up, for me to be like, well, I know you're doing that, but I'm going to stay anyway. I mean, I guess you can argue what difference is it to the landlord because they're still getting the rent, but it would seem to interfere with
With the right for them to direct their property.
yeah, to control their property.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think there's a workaround to that? Like just this idea of the finality of the contract. If in the contract it stated that at the end of the lease you had to vacate and you sign that lease, and it means you're agreeing to vacate at the end of that lease, would
Right.
that get around this law?
I think under this law, that term would be considered unenforceable.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I think that might go too far, but I'd be interested in hearing more information as to why they believe that's a necessary part of it.
Right, right. And I'm sure there's some kind of a reasoning somewhere, but
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think they basically just want to have the policy be that people should be able to stay in their homes, right? If they're renting, they shouldn't be put in a situation where they're forced out on the street. As long as they're paying their rent and they're being good tenants, they should have the right to stay where they are and not risk homelessness or trying to find a different place.
right. And in that term, thinking that way, it makes sense because, like I said, the homeless crisis, the rental crisis, the housing crisis, all of those things, you want to get people that be as stable as possible to not
Right.
exacerbate the situation.
But let me ask you this, right? Because I understand the scenario where, all right, if people are basically forced to find a different place every year or whenever the lease is up,
Right.
that's going to keep driving up the rents, right? Because
Yes.
now we're going to have more vacancies and then they can charge a higher rent. So
You
this
know, you know what it's
homeless
called a holdover. That's what it's called.
holdover situation.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the loophole. So if a landlord, when they go to court, when they file their petition, they can use that and say a holdover because they could claim the apartment back as
Mm-hmm.
long as they're not going to court and writing and saying they're looking to. The reason why they need the tenant out is because they're not getting any money. It's going to go. But if it's a holdover, you can they look for you to do at least agreement 6 months, and after that the court will give you back the apartment no matter what. And you know what, I'm gonna see if I could, I know, let me just see if I could get somebody straight from the court right now that will
Okay.
explain that deals with that, just the
Yeah.
explanation of
Because
it.
I don't deal with landlord tenant law, but I'm interested in this stuff.
Okay.
So yeah, what
So
I was
it seems like that the law still, this good cause eviction law still um would apply here. That landlord would still have to provide that good cause, even in
Yeah.
that holdover proceeding. Yeah.
Maybe we can get a little bit more clarity on that. My question though is, so we just
All
talked.
right, I have the person.
Oh, you have them? Oh, that was quick.
All right.
Uh,
Yeah, Rachel, can you explain the holdover for me?
So a holdover is basically that the landlord wants back possession of the property. It doesn't have to be because there are rents and arrears. It's usually a private home and they just want back the space. They can want the space back for any type of reason. It can be if they want to put someone else there, if they want to rent it, if they don't want to rent it, they want their kids to move there. It's a private home, and usually in a holdover, the tenant has to move. There's no wins on that because it's a private home, so they have to move. In a holdover case, also the landlord can get rent money from them. They would just get a judgment after the holdover is done. But it's mainly they want the property back.
And how does that work with this good cause eviction law that went into effect last year?
The thing is, in a private home, it's still a private home. It doesn't operate the same way as like a building that, it doesn't operate the same way as a building. It's like a private owner. It's, like a mom and pop thing compared to like a big corporation. So the same rules don't necessarily apply. But in a holdover case, even if the court grants the tenant more time to be in the apartment, ultimately they still have to leave. And as long as you're occupying space, you have to pay rent. So a lot of times, sometimes the landlords, they may offer the tenant money to move, and, as an incentive for the tenant to move. It doesn't happen all the time, but either way, it ends up with the tenant having to. In the private homes, they're never going to tell a private home you have to have this tenant stay here because they're paying their rent. Even I've heard situations where landlords have put people out and they're like, they just want the apartment to put a dog in it. And it doesn't matter. It's private. And they're entitled to do what they want with the home.
Right.
Unfortunately. But I've seen some crazy situations, but that's pretty much how it works. They can get time. I've seen people get 6 months, 3 months, 9 months. Like they're not going to put you out on the street in 30 days. Right. But the thing is, when people get holdovers, they need to go and file an answer. That's where a lot of people end up on the wrong side of it. When you get those notices, go to court and file an answer, find out what your rights are, go to the help center, get as much information as you can. Because when people ignore it, that's the worst thing you can do because they can get a judgment on default with no problem. And next thing you know, there's a marshal, your things are outside. And once the marshal's involved, you're not getting back in the apartment.
Right.
Because it's a holdover. It has nothing to do with money.
Right. But you said they can still obtain a judgment for unpaid rent from the court?
I'm sorry?
You said even in that situation, they can obtain a judgment for unpaid rent?
Yeah, they can still get it. If the tenant owes them rent, a lot of times what they'll do is if the tenant is like not paying them rent and it's gone past a certain time, instead of starting a non-payment case, they'll start a holdover case so that they can get the tenant out. And then what they do is file a civil case against the tenant and get the money that way.
Right.
Yeah.
What if the tenant is paying their rent and there's been no violations?
If they want them out, they still have to go. It's a holdover. They want back the space. It's a holdover case. It's not a non-payment case. It's a holdover. They want the space. Yeah. So they can try to negotiate in court, a certain amount of time that they can stay or something like that. But it's easier to try to talk to the landlord, especially if it's someone that you could speak with, and just let them know, hey, I found a place, or, maybe we can forego 2 months rent, or, try to negotiate, because ultimately they want the space for whatever reason they want the space. So it's up to them. Right. I've seen landlords pay people $10,000 to leave an apartment.
To your knowledge, this new good cause eviction law does not affect the holdover process at all, or do you think it does in some way?
It might stall it a little bit, but it's not going to keep you in that apartment. You still ultimately have to leave. If the landlord wants you out and it's a private home, you're going to end up having to go. You're not going to be there 2 years, 3 years. It's not going to lag on that long. Because it might cause a hardship to the landlord. Like, people do this all the time. Like, sometimes when people are selling homes, private homes, and the new owner is like, yeah, I don't want tenants in here. They have to get them out before they can even start. You know what I mean? So it happens a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
That's good
Well,
information.
I'm not in housing court anymore. I'm in Supreme Civil, but I can try to touch base tomorrow, ask a few questions because I have one of my friends is an attorney there in the health center, so I can, ask him a few questions about holdovers and.
Well,
Yeah.
you're on live right now.
In particular, how this new law affects the process.
You're on live right now. That information we need it now.
Yeah, welcome to the Nuance show.
We appreciate the information. And of course, it's not legal advice. We all understand that. We're just talking, for information.
Right.
Yeah.
But always remember that the courts, especially housing courts, always have a help center. So if you don't know, what's going on, or you just want to make sure something is legal, go to the help center. At the very least, they can let you know what your rights are and what you can do under the law. They can't advise you because they work for the courts, but they can tell you what your rights are and what you can do under the law. Absolutely. They just can't tell you file the paper, do this, do that, but yeah.
Right.
Okay.
No, I appreciate the information. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
All right.
See you later.
Yeah, so that's what it was.
Ozzy coming in clutch with the
look at that.
with the pro information.
Man, I'm in the community, man.
That's what's up. Appreciate
that's
that.
normally what because it's been a while since I told somebody that I really don't see too many. So basically that's one of the loopholes I would say. So I'm not gonna file if I own a home and somebody, they're not paying rent. I'm not gonna go to court and say, yo, they're not paying rent. I'm gonna go with the holdover. Say I want the apartment because my dog wants, and I'm gonna get.
I wonder how strong that could be if the landlord has multiple properties. Like, could they do that on every property? Because you can only live in one.
Right. You only have one mom.
Right. So could the landlord?
As she said, it doesn't make, because you could have two doors. You could say I have two doors. You could say I have, my cousin, you could name anybody in your family. Each house is a private home. It's not like a building, a corporation.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, with this new law, I'm just wondering what would be considered good cause, if that's going to be part of the argument, right? Like maybe the tenant, if they have a good lawyer, can push back against that and say that's not considered good cause, that you have to evict me for your ferret or whatever.
Right. I mean, but hey, man, ferrety, needs room to run.
Yeah. So the question I had to get back to an earlier part of the discussion is, we understand this prohibition against unreasonable rent increases, especially on the same tenant, right? You don't want the landlord jacking up your rent, but does that also apply to a new tenant coming in, right? So if someone leaves after their lease term, let's say, and now the apartment is vacant, you find someone else to move in, does the law, as it currently stands, allow them to jack up that rent to whatever they want, or are they still confined by that reasonable increase, even if it's a new person?
Right. And to be clear, that reasonable increase that was in the law that we read earlier was an 8.38% was. No, go ahead.
That was as based on the inflation rate in New York last year.
I said the inflation rate was about 3-something%, and then the reasonable increase would have been 8.38%.
It adds 5% to the rate of inflation. That's how they calculate the increase.
Right. So the question, I get what you're saying is like, okay, if the lease is over with, there's no tenant, can they go beyond that if they so choose?
Does that only apply to the current tenant is my question, right? Or if it's property, can they then say, well, now we're going to charge, 10,000 more than whatever they want? Or are they still confined by that increment?
I would imagine they could charge whatever they want, because it's not an increase on anyone specifically, because it's an open space at that point.
It wouldn't be considered increasing the rent, right? It's just a new
rent. It's setting the rent. Right.
And so that's also why you want to make sure, if you're going to do it that way, that's why you want to make sure that you're not just kicking people out, right? Because that would make it easier to just keep increasing the rent as high as you wanted it to be. That's why I think maybe an alternative approach would be to say, I don't know if this even is feasible, but to say, instead of doing it where people can never be kicked out after their lease, all right, maybe if you want to kick them out, you can kick them out, but when the new person comes in, you can't raise the rent a whole lot more than what you were charging the last person. No, would that make sense?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Shout out to my landlords in New York. I was there for like 8 years, and I only had like 2 rent increases. So.
Well, tell the story real quick about the proposed rent increase in Japan that was optional, apparently.
Yeah, so this year I got a letter from the landlord company, and it was about a rental increase coming up for the next term. And so, I didn't, just to get clarity, because it was all written in Japanese, I called them up and was like, "Hey, so let me get this clear here. This is the rent increase." And he's like, "Yeah, if you agree with it, then, sign it and send it back." And I was like, "Okay, so if I don't agree with this here, then I have to move to a new place." To be clear, it's like, "Oh, no, no. No, this is just if you don't agree, then you can stay in the place at the same rent you're paying. It's up to you." So they're basically asking me to just voluntarily pay more on the rent, um, which is something I'd never ever heard of before. And
Right.
what really kind of makes it even funnier is the rent increase that they wanted was about $10.
Okay. And so you agree to it?
I did not.
Oh, you not? Okay.
I did not.
See, I'm wondering culturally if most people do in Japan. Is that just like a dance that happens, or what is that about?
You're kind of you're on mute, Ozzy.
I'm sorry. I'm. It's interesting you brought that up because I mean that is definitely unusual. But if you notice in other countries, we're the only country every everything has to be big. You know, if you notice that in other countries, a lot of the countries is um the space is different, it's smaller, it's just content, right? I don't know how big was your place where you stayed?
It's tiny. It's like a upper Manhattan apartment. It's really one of those small ones. However, my rent is nowhere near Manhattan. It's
Exactly. And this is think about that for a second. Where we live at in the United States, but when you go to other countries, basically we're paying to in the United States. Well, let's say in New York, we're paying in New York pretty much have a place to live. In other countries, you're paying your rent, but you're able to live, like as far as do other things other than just work to pay for rent. And it's
right.
create we go to different countries. If you notice, the space is smaller. Everything is just content. They just have space, with your bathroom,
Right.
with your TV, your refrigerator. Everything here in the United States and is everything is big. And
Right.
it's crazy because when you go to other countries, you have to actually ask yourself, why is things are so the price is so low? It's less than what we pay here in the United States or even in New York City. I could
Mm-hmm.
say that,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And that, I look at things like that because it's like very interesting how much money that we spend here in America versus
Right.
other countries is
Yeah, and then you have people in Europe who vacation like 10 times a year or whatever, right? They get so
exactly
much time off, they have all this
Right.
exactly
income. Yeah, you're right. And Americans tend not to. Everyone's living paycheck to paycheck here.
Well,
because
I
you're
tell you
looking
what,
at the structure.
no, I was gonna say, I know people here you can afford an apartment and a car, at least in this city that I'm at. I know people who do, and they have a car and an apartment, and they work part-time.
Mm.
So
But
that
that's
speaks to your point. That gives you more control over your life and your time to explore whatever you want to explore. I see people starting small businesses, and they may not be raking in the customers, but because cost of living is so much lower, it doesn't have to be that stressfulness to do that. They can explore these different areas.
right. But to
Um,
be fair, you're not in
When you was
Tokyo.
in Japan, which one
Tokyo, you
was
couldn't do
cheaper?
it.
I'm sorry?
No, I was saying just to be fair, that doesn't speak for all of Japan, right? That's just where you're
No, absolutely not.
Tokyo, for example, you couldn't do something like that.
Um,
Not as easily.
Not as easily. Tokyo is one of those cities that's on the scale of like a New York City. Actually, I think there are more people living in Tokyo than in New York. But you can still find affordable apartments in Tokyo.
Yep.
You can still find apartment like the size that I'm in Tokyo for about 650, 700 a month,
Wow.
depending on where you're at. You know,
Yeah.
I'm out in the countryside and I'm paying about 300 a month.
Wow. Okay.
You know, so there's still affordable options even in major cities,
And the
whereas
price
I
of
don't think
food
New
in
York has
Tokyo,
that. I'm sorry?
the price of food is in Tokyo, the price of food is compared to here. How is
Um, I think it's probably, I would imagine it's probably a little bit cheaper to some things. It depends though,
Mhm.
right? There are a lot of cheap options, but fresh fruits and vegetables can be expensive. But then their cheap options probably have a slightly higher quality ingredients in some cases. So it just kind of depends where you're at. So
All right.
people make a way in Tokyo, and you know, I think the average salary in Tokyo is probably somewhere around 35K a year,
Wow. I
yeah.
would think
plus
more.
or minus.
Okay. In Tokyo. Wow.
And look at
It,
places. Thailand. Thailand is
Oh yeah.
inexpensive.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
So I want to
So
put the poll question out for the people, and we can revisit the landlord tenant discussion next week. So the poll question of the week is: do you believe landlords should be able to evict tenants just because their lease is up? And then we can get some feedback on that one.
yeah, absolutely. And of course, I have to put the poll for next week. I didn't get it. I didn't get that one up either.
Yeah. So that one was about what, modifying the birthright citizenship clause, basically overriding the 14th Amendment. Is that what we were asking about?
I believe that's what we asked about there.
Yeah. I think we
So
asked if we predicted that that would be overturned.
if we think, yeah, if that would be overturned or not. And I think since then, there has been a judge has put a stop to it
Actually, we
for
predicted,
now.
right? We predicted that as soon as this got filed, a judge would put a stop to it, but appeals would be ongoing. And then once it made its way up the ladder, like to the Supreme Court of the U.S., then we would see
Right.
what really fell. So we'll see.
Right. Absolutely. And the weirdest part of that is really that they're arguing that Native Americans aren't necessarily American citizens, which
Yeah,
is
it's wild stuff, but it doesn't surprise me because I was talking last week about the origins of that subject to the jurisdiction thereof and how
right.
diplomats have been excluded from that, and Native Americans originally were as well, right? But yeah, I mean, all this stuff is very frightening. What's going on? Putting the legal framework aside, just the fact that they're even pursuing this, I think, is crazy.
It's insane.
Yeah.
It's insane. So
So, Ozzy, do you have any thoughts on that? I know this administration is coming in; they're doing all sorts of things in this first week. The ICE raids have been ongoing, and they're putting an end, or they're attempting to put an end to birthright citizenship.
you know, I'm gonna tell you this, and this is so let me put a disclaimer, my opinion.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm gonna say this. What Trump is doing, I see the game that he's playing. He know a lot of these things because it's, listen, when you're in the barber shop or if you in the community, wherever you're at, it's always the real conversation of why we can't do this and why we can't do that and why. What I think Trump is doing, he knows, and especially he have his advisors around him. He knows that a lot of stuff that he know that he can't do. But the thing about it, he knows that by just doing, putting out these executive orders and just saying these things, he know that it's going to work in his favor because he's going to get he's going to be they're going to fight back. It's going to be a fight back. But what happens is to the public, it looks like, look, I'm doing it, but look what's happening. They're trying to stop me because you know
yep.
why? 97 or 98% of the public doesn't understand politics.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And it's not their, I don't want to say it's their fault. And I know, people say, well, you have to educate yourself. But politics is it's like so boring. So who wants to be interested in that, right?
Yeah.
And what happens is we have grew up in politics to say, well, whoever is in office, they're going to have our best interests at heart, right? And that's where we fell short at. So people that's I don't blame people for not understanding politics because they really don't know. And the elected officials that's in office is not going to be there to teach them because, they have their own agenda. But now what we're seeing, I see this game that's happening. He knows the courts is going to stop him, but he's pushing the envelope. And the more that he's showing that, listen, what I told you in my campaign that I'm doing, the more the public that follows him, they get stronger and united. Because they say he's doing what we want to. We always talked
Yeah.
about this for
Yeah.
years.
It's a way
So
of
it's a psychological thing.
he's basically
The
saying, look,
question,
I'm keeping my campaign promises. I'm doing things I said I was going to do, but they're all stopping it, right? They're
Right.
exactly. That's the game.
yeah.
That's the perfect. This guy, listen, Trump is not stupid. Trust me. And he has people around him, and that's the strategy. That's one of the strategies. Listen, he focused on the immigration, right? I knew that at the time that we was going to have a problem when Biden came into office. As I kept telling everybody, I said, "Oh, yeah, okay, trust me, it's going to get hard." And you know what happens? What people don't realize in these agencies, no matter what they are, businesses, you got to have your Republicans that's in the agencies or private businesses, corporations. Um, you got to have your Democrats, right? So let's just say the border. What my problem was is that you have border patrol officers. So that means what? Because I'm just, and let me put a disclaimer, and I'm just saying allegedly. So you got to tell me um, they couldn't secure the border properly with the officers that's there. They probably say, you know what, I don't like Biden. I don't want him in office. And you know what? If he wants, all right, so we got to let it happen. We just got to turn a blind eye and let them come in. You know what I mean? When you are border patrol, any job that you do, and especially if you've been there for years, you know every part of that area where you work at. I've talked to a couple of border patrol officers. And the first question, how long you been working a job? Oh, I've been working 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. You got to know every part where who comes in. And on top of that, you have volunteer military people that don't get paid. They just volunteer to drive up and down the border. So, I mean, listen, it's all a game because it's a political thing, and this is what Trump wanted to use to come back into become president. Because if you let everybody in, you turn a blind eye. Okay, you want the border open? Okay, we let everybody in. Never mind screening properly. If you're talking about we have people that have criminal background, what was supposed to happen is if you came, all right, let's say, all right, Biden says, okay, everybody come in. What was supposed to happen is you were supposed to check their background. So now if they coming in and they did a crime, so you meant to tell me you didn't do your job properly. But again, the public doesn't see that part. Just like businesses. Right. If I'm a Republican and I own Target, I own Walmart, I'm just using this as an example. I could put the prices up and because I'm going to force the public to blame the person that's in office.
Right.
Price gouging. It's a psychological game. And I feel like, you know what? For those that's in power at the time, the Democratic Party, I feel it's like our fault, because it's a lot of stuff that we had questions and, it was pretty much, we don't educate the public enough. I'm talking about each individual as an elected official.
Right. Even if the policy is better on our side, to the voters, it means nothing if the messaging isn't there to go along with it.
Right.
Educate people.
If they don't understand it.
Right. And like you said, look, it isn't just that politics are boring. People have busy lives, right? And you can't expect everyone. I mean, of course, people should educate themselves, but you can't just expect everyone's going to know everything that goes on. It really is up to the people in office who are enacting some of these policies, which can be good to let people know why it's good, how their lives are being improved by it. And that piece is often missing, especially from the Democrats, I think. I think they're really bad at communicating that message effectively.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And that's, like I said, we don't know. Just like, why would we go to hire a lawyer when we go to court? Because we don't know.
Right.
Why would I go to I go about, a call, like if I go to I go to the doctor to find out, why am I feeling sick? The doctor knows. I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
Ask the doctor. I'm relying on
Yeah.
information, and you can divert me. You can, you know, divert my attention any way you want because I don't understand your job. I'm just depending on you. So you give me any type of information.
Yeah.
But this is what the point I'm making to you is like a lot of things we're not educated. I mean, unless we put our time into it. But this is why we depend, and this is where they take advantage of the
Yeah.
public.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
So I know we got to wrap up pretty
The
soon.
question is,
Yeah.
the question in the future is, we have to give out the solution or what's the plan now. So, okay, since we're talking about this real quick, now we have to give out information on what's the plan on how we can correct it as a community.
Hmm. Yeah.
Right.
That's the question.
Sounds like he was about to go into a bottom line there, Mike. Is that what it sounded like to you?
Kind of, but no, it's a good question, and it's about messaging, and I think that responsibility mostly falls on people who work in politics or in government, but like you said, it's up to the community as well. If there are people who are adjacent to that, right? If people are in the know, I think it's really maybe incumbent upon all of us to educate people more, to get that information out there more,
Absolutely.
right? As far as what's going on. And also where people can even look at some of it. For example, how are your local representatives voting, right? How are they voting in Albany? How are they voting in the city council? Do most people even know about that? Do most people know they can go online and look at the votes? Maybe in theory, but I don't think most people are really paying attention to that kind of thing, right? Maybe that should be shown to people more,
Mm.
because I see
Well,
this,
well,
especially in
but
local elections. People focus on visibility. They focus on, how many public events did you do? How many times do we see your face at the parade or whatever? But no one ever really talks about, and it happens rarely, but not often enough, right? They're not talking about how are they voting in Albany or in City Hall, or what legislation have they advanced, or what results have they produced. That seems to be secondary and tertiary in the conversation, right? There's not enough focus on that, and that's a problem.
Mm.
so and on another topic, we already have. So we know we already have Trump in office. Okay. The one thing that I'm paying attention to, and I talk to people in the community now, is that now you have to pay attention to your local election. So we have the mayor. That you know that is something that we have to look at to see who is the best candidate.
So, Ozzy, I'm going to put you on the spot. Your prediction,
Uh-oh.
just a prediction, as of now, yes or no, do you think Adams drops out of the race for mayor?
I don't think he's going to drop out, but
Okay.
his numbers is low because his pride is in the way.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he's got an uphill battle big time.
He needs his numbers is low, so he needs to drop out, but he's not going to do it. He's going to, push it to the end, and you know, the question is though, who's going to? We have to find. We got to see which candidate is the best candidate.
I agree.
So
And we need to
I
make
have a
sure.
solution. I have something. I have something that's very simple
Okay.
that I think that the viewers need to pay attention to, that we can do, or that you can do, or y'all can do. Um, Anybody that's running for office, we need to first look it up and make a list of all the campaign donors that's donating to them and read it out, because that's part of educating the public as well. Because what the public don't realize is the ones that fund these elected officials is like these corporations, businesses, is the one that really controls politics, and you can see it at Trump. Look who's on his team that's
Right.
part of running the United States. They have a seat at the
Follow the
table.
money. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
all
If
billionaires,
you go to
yeah.
any elected official, you could see who is funding. And if you pay, because I've been doing some research, if you look at a lot of the companies and businesses, and it's the same names, and they're putting their money in various candidates. The same names. You'll see the same names pop up.
Right. We
So
have
that's the
a comment in the chat asking how can we see who's donating to them?
So it depends on the level of race it is, right? So for a New York City race, you look at the New York City Campaign Finance Board website. You can do
Right.
similar state level officials or candidates with the New York State Board of Elections. So you have to figure out the level it is. There's something similar also for the federal offices, right? But that is all public. You can just Google it and you should be able to find it. It's all on a searchable database.
Yeah. All
So
right.
yes, we are about to wrap up here. Ozzy, is there anything going on in Rockaway that you want to call our attention to? I know you're very active with the community board, CB14 down there. Anything local happening?
The one, you know, I was trying to get the website for you so I could put it in the chat. I was looking for it, but the one thing that's right now that's people are focusing on right now is everybody's really focusing right now in the Rockaways and the conversation is dealing with with the executive orders that Trump have put out, have
Right.
signed. So that's one of the things, whether it's Medicaid, you know, um, whether it's DEI.
Right.
Um, so those are
The
the things,
deportation stuff.
yeah. So those are the different, monitoring Social Security, Medicare. So
Mm.
that's like one of the major topics right now that I can think of. Felicia Johnson probably would know more, her being the manager on the community
Right, right.
district. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll have to reach out to her. Maybe we can get her on here as well to talk about some of these issues. It is troubling, right? That you see these executive orders and some of the actions that the administration is taking. It isn't just something that you look at and you boo at your TV over on watching cable or whatever. These things have very real impacts in the community. And you said even, people in the Rockaway community oftentimes hyper focused on local issues, but when you are facing stuff like this, this becomes your local issue, which becomes your reality. And to make sure that we stay vigilant in the face of all this.
Absolutely. It just kind of a dystopian image in my head as far as these ICE raids, especially when it comes to New York and how closely the different communities are mixed. And mentioned earlier, I can imagine some Puerto Ricans getting caught up in this and this and that. And then just my mind goes to this idea that people are going to be hiding people in their homes to avoid these ICE raids. And it's just such a dystopian type of imagery.
Yeah, it's like Anne Frank, right?
Yeah. But
Exactly. That was the idea.
at the same time, though, the Hispanic community, a lot of them, what is it, 40 something percent that voted for Trump?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a
Wow.
whole other topic.
Yeah.
But
You can only imagine the backlash happening now, right? With some of the stuff, and people are freaking out. And it's like, but he kind of said that's what he was going to do. So,
he's said it from the beginning.
all right. Well, we are going to.
Wait, everything is new right now. So those that voted for him, they feeling happy because, listen, if somebody's saying they doing something,
Yeah.
I mean, listen, I give Trump credit. Like he's just listen. He knows how to reach out to the grassroots. The grassroots when it comes to grassroots in the community. But
Mm.
it's just that it's going to have a effect. So I'm waiting for like as a year come. I'm not really waiting because I'm gonna, I want to be out in the community, go door to door, and
Right.
encourage people to get involved. But but you know what? It's gonna have an effect, a major effect. I just want to see how bad it's going to be.
Yeah.
When you start changing things that went through the trials and tribulations and things are set, there's going to be a problem.
Right.
Absolutely.
The problem I have, and a lot of elected officials do it, um, not all, but when it comes to voting, I don't like the one size fit all. The one size fit all approach.
Mm-hmm.
Just cut everything because Trump and the millionaires, they never came from the bottom to understand. They don't understand what it's like to not have opportunities, or
Right.
if you have to work 10 times harder to get to where you have to get. And a lot of times, most times what they bank on, because I see what Trump is doing, he's trying to run it like how you do a corporation. When it's a private sector, you can instill fear, you can fire, you can hire pretty much who you want. And I see that he's coming with that approach. The
Yeah.
thing is that we have laws like the civil service laws. So when you're dealing with federal, when you're dealing with state, you're dealing with city, we're protected under the civil service law. It's based off of merit. It's not
Right.
based off of favoritism or political affiliation. And he thinks that, he could come in and he's trying to to wipe out, but then you get rid of DEI and then you turn around and say, oh, it's not fair. But then you hire people that's not qualified on your team and you put a bunch of billionaires. And you meant to tell
Right.
me that you only have one black person, that you put you don't have any qualified black or brown people to put on your team, you know? So it just and then you want to put people that's loyal to you and that's loyal to you. So
Right.
how does that translate as far as to the communities? How is that fair? If you have a
Right.
problem, if I go into a restaurant and they discriminated against me, it's not going to be looked at on the federal level.
Right.
Yeah. And you've also articulated a danger in governing unilaterally through executive order, right? Because, like you said,
Right.
a lot of these policies have been tested and have been through it, gone through the legislative process, been upheld
Right.
in courts, or maybe modified by the courts, maybe modified by further legislation. But that's part of the system that we're supposed to have in this country, right? But when you just come into the presidency and start dismantling things with executive order, you're circumventing that process. The people have a right to that process being upheld, right? The legislative process is one that's, it's done by committee. It's done by, in theory, a diverse group of people with varied interests coming to the table and coming up with a solution that hopefully benefits the most people. But like you said, you don't want that one size fits all thing where someone can come in and just do what they want with no checks on them, right? And then when you have the
Right.
court behaving the way it is, that's also a problem, right? Because we see they haven't been enough of a check against the federal power in many cases.
Right. And
Right.
I just want to say this one thing. I want to just put this out there since this is being recorded. I just want to say this to the black and brown people. I disagree with boycotting because you have families, you have people that's working these jobs, and what you're doing is going to affect. You can't be like a Trump and feel like he could just fire people. He's not even thinking about, you know, how they're going to pay their rent, their mortgage, their kids' college. He's not thinking. He's just want to fire everybody, and he's not thinking about if somebody's working in the organization or agency. You have a top person, so you could have got rid of the top person, but you're not thinking of the people that's following. The direction was coming from the top. So everyone, you're just firing everybody, so everybody has to suffer. I don't think that we should play that, but there is a way that you can deal with that situation to get your point across when dealing with these businesses that's not being fair when it comes to the community.
So which boycotts were you talking about? You said you don't agree with the boycotts?
Yeah, well, it was a thing going over the internet and Facebook because various like Target was one of them.
Oh, I see.
Let's
The businesses that
right,
contributed to Trump. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
they're,
right,
they're the ones that are rolling back the DEI policies as
yeah,
well. Right.
yes,
There's someone is collecting a list and making a list of all of these things, and saying, we should put a boycott in effect on some of these companies.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. It
So
affects
our thing is this, and this is what I want to tell everybody when this video is out, is that listen, if you come together, all it takes is for you to sit down and strategize. It's nothing that is listen, we in the times where it's gonna seem a little hectic, but we live in America and we have rights still,
For now.
freedom,
For now.
and we just have to exercise it and come together and come up with the best solution. Come up with the best solution to and strategize. That doesn't mean that certain things can be put place on video, to talk about, but it's certain things that can be done within these organizations. So
Yeah.
all it takes is for us to come together and strategize. And also we have to look at the future to see who is going to be starting locally. We have to pay attention who we going to vote for to be in office to represent us properly, as far as being fair across the board.
Yeah.
You're dealing with disabilities, you're dealing with the elderly, you're dealing with mental illness. It's a lot of different things that you deal with that needs to be addressed. Again, it's not a one size fit all.
That to me sounds like the bottom line, Jay.
It works for me. I think it sounds good.
Yes. Thank you for that. Ozzy, any last words before we sign off, or is that good? Because we give our guests the bottom line.
I just want to say thank you for inviting me.
Oh, yeah, of course. Absolutely. Anytime.
Anytime.
I learned a lot.
Likewise.
Anytime. We think
that call for us too. So maybe we'll get more information on that as well with the holdovers.
Yeah, anytime. Our purpose of these is, call it nuance, to have the nuanced discussions that, it's not really being had in a lot of places. People take very extreme sides, and even though, we have our sides, we try to also look at how the other sides might have formed their opinions or their viewpoints. And so having these discussions to inform people and to look through those possibilities, I think is very important. So
absolutely.
Appreciate you joining us.
Where can people find us?
They can find us on YouTube at Nuance Show, and everywhere that podcasts are available: Apple Music, Amazon, Spotify, all those places.
Sounds good. As always, we thank you for joining us. We've got work to do. We'll catch you next time. Have a good night.
And Mike, real quick, are you
Yeah.
going to run for office in the future?
In the future, yeah, I certainly do have my eyes on things. We'll see how it plays out. Thank you, guys.